This is week 4, Alternatives to Justice, Restorative Justice. Going to be going over prison programs as well as the prison population. I'm going to begin by going over some information that's really not in your books, but that we will discuss in class, and I also want you to just to know this because it's important. The Pew is the Pew Charitable Trust, and it is a research agency that does a lot of research on global research and public policy organization. It is operated as an independent, nonpartisan, non-governmental organization dedicated to serving the public and getting out information to the public. It's an independent nonprofit. It has priorities that have included cancer research, the Red Cross, and a pioneering project to assist historically Black colleges. The cost of incarceration continues to rise, and the United States houses over 26% of the world's prison population. 26%. And according to the Pew Charitable Trust in 2008, 1 in every 100 adults in the U.S. is incarcerated. And I mentioned this in class, and now I think it's about 1 in every 115. So the population is going down. The state can contain prison and jail growth. This can contain prison and jail growth while protecting public safety and holding offenders accountable. The overall use of incarceration must be approached with the intention to make immediate alternatives, which is where restorative justice comes in. So we're going to look at some successful programs that you read in your chapters. More on the Pew before we get to that. It lays the foundation for effective policy solutions by informing and engaging citizens, linking diverse interests to pursue common cause. If you have a chance, you should look up the Pew Charitable Trust. They have a lot of research topics. There's a current project that seeks to strengthen environmental and energy policies to protect our oceans, wildlands, improve health through investments, improve civic life in Philadelphia, which are we partner with a diverse range of donors at the Pew, both public and private organizations and concerned citizens. And so I really suggest for you to take a look at this. I'll put this on Blackboard for you as well, the website. Our penal system, as I said in 2008, it was one, let's see, here we are. In 2012, it was 1 in every 108 adults in America that were in prison or jail. Over 4 million people were on probation or parole in 2012 for a total of 6,937,000 under some form of criminal justice supervision. That's an outrageous number. The 2011 U.S. incarceration rate of 716 people per 100,000 is the highest in the world. That either tells you that we're doing a really good job of putting our criminals away, or we're just putting way too many people in prison and under supervision. Rates of incarceration fail to have a clear impact on overall crime reduction. Policymakers are becoming increasingly aware of the research-backed strategies for community corrections. There are better ways to identify who can be managed in community, new technologies to monitor whereabouts and behavior, and there's more effective supervision and treatment programs. As we talked about, sometimes it's just the idea of moving that money, taking the money from building new prisons to putting it into these community programs. No one doubts the need to lock up violent criminals and those who threaten community. As we've talked about, restorative justice does not want the prisons to open up and let out our violent criminals. We also don't want someone who has been convicted of a heinous crime to be put back in the community without any type of treatment or intervention. This found this under the Sentencing Project from 1925 to 2013. This just gives you an idea of our prison population. Now in 2013, it did go down, and I think it's continuing to go down. And if you want to, just pause the recording for a minute and just take a look at these numbers. Now we're going to move to the readings and the chapters that you had this week. Even though two of the chapters are going to be discussed in class, I'm going to just briefly talk about those chapters as well, just to kind of pull in some information. But I'm still going to leave it up to the students, and you know who you are, to make sure that you go over the important information from that chapter. But more importantly, I want you to focus on how do you feel about that program? Do you think it's successful, and why do you think it's successful? But first, let's talk about Brazil's restorative prison. We already know that prisons do not deter criminality, but the APAC, which is an association for the protection of the condemned, and the assistance, the assistance of convicts. It was originally named the Association for the Protection of the Condemned, but it has changed to be more politically correct. So it's the assistance of convicts and not condemned. The Brazilian prison system is described as very humane with a 70% recidivism rate. It has overcrowding, corruption, prison gangs control. Do you see any? Is this similar to the United States? What do you see as similar? Or here. And there's a good report on the Bureau of Justice Statistics on this. So because these prisons were labeled as corrupt with all these prison gangs, very violent, in 1972, Dr. Mario Ottoboni, he felt that his Catholicism was hollow. He felt he was in a personal crisis, and he felt called to visit the prisons in Brazil. He felt that God was giving him a message to go to these prisons. So he visited the prisons. He saw the brutality, the horrible conditions. He found them to be inhumane, as I said, with a 70% recidivism rate. He wanted to put his religious values into practice. He wanted faith-based and programs built on his Catholic principles. He created the first fully based prison. There's now over 30 across the country. And this was built with the help of the volunteers from the community. I mentioned this in class a little bit, but as you're going to read in this chapter, you're going to see a lot more about it. We also, I've got a video to show you on this prison. His restorative approach, the inmates were not called inmates. They were called recuperandos, or meaning people who are undergoing a process of rehabilitation. Ottoboni said that a person is always more than just the mistakes that he or she makes. And he really wanted to make a difference within the prisons and with the people imprisoned. He wanted to emphasize inherent worth of each person. One way is the ritual or ceremony of removing shackles on arrival, and they stay off. In other words, when they come through those doors, there is a ceremony, and they remove those shackles. They don't put them back on. They don't go right into the main population, but it's a big deal when they take those off. These prisons are not typical. The inmates have much more freedom than you see in any other prison. They're treated with respect the minute they walk in. Volunteers and incarcerated people administer these prison. Inmates have keys to the doors, and they are locked in. They lock themselves in, and they keep the keys. The inmates take responsibility, and therefore they accept accountability. So you ask, what is the madness behind this methodology? Well, I'll tell you. The community participation is extremely important. Volunteers from the community come in, they teach classes, they educate, they have programs. The assistance builds trust. They go into the community and work with the inmates, go into the community and work with the volunteers. They help one another. They make each other accountable and respectable, and they are expected to do good. They do work within the prison. The prison is self-sufficient, and the prisoners do all the work in the program, the kitchen, outside work, keeping their gardens. They use democratic principles with their own bylaws and resolutions. Depending on their security level, depends on their job. They are self-sufficient. They all work and contribute to the living conditions outside. As I said, doing the outside, working on the kitchen, working in the bathrooms, cleaning the prison, everything. Religion, freedom of worshiping or not on any religion. If you're not a Christian, the program is not considered a Christian program, but it is built on faith. It's more of an emphasis on the personal reformation for reintegration. All inmates are provided legal assistance. The volunteers and members of the community help out with that. They all receive health care. The state provides the basic care from the community. The human valorization, this is the foundation of the methodology. In other, that you treat them with dignity. You put the human being in the first place. You reshape their self-image, which extends to their family. They treat inmates how you would want to be treated. The family is very important and is allowed to visit. It includes family conferences as well as work. There's no searches of the families when they come in. Volunteers receive training before helping or working with each inmate. In Social Reintegration Center, where all the inmates participate in programs upon release. Does this happen in the United States? They are built on merit, where you move up and receive additional responsibilities according to your production. What they do improves their own lives. They show their worth, they publicize good things, and they get rewards. It's also built on deliverance through Christ workshop. They experience a short journey, and they are assigned a godparent to help and mentor them through all of their experience. They build a relationship from the beginning to repair the harm. Workshops. Oh, what did you just hear? Repair the harm with the offender. The victim's not even involved here. Take note of that. Is it true that we really are products of our environment? And how are we seen? How would this work in the United States, do you think? Prisoners are treated a certain way upon arrival at this prison and have to become defensive in order to survive. Let me back that up. That is relating to the United States. Prisoners are always treated a certain way when they go to both prisons. When you come into the United States, you go into a U.S. prison, you become very defensive, and then you have to survive. I'm sorry, I didn't want to mix that up to you. The relationships are at the heart of APAC. It increases the inmates' value so they do not want to continue in their life of harm. But with the APAC prison, not just anyone is allowed in. A judge normally decides based upon the input of the defendant, behavior review, and the APAC administration. Originally, they're housed in a regular prison upon conviction, and then the judge will make a referral to send them to this prison, one of these prisons. Transitions after arrival. They arrive and stay in a closed section. Then they move to a semi-open section, and then they move to the final conditional stage where there's minimum supervision, and they can go back to the closed section or the semi-open section at any point if they are not abiding by the rules. Now let's look at their outcomes. There is significantly less recidivism, 16% for those that go to the APAC, 36% for other prisons. As a matter of fact, here is the YouTube. I will also, this is the one I want you to watch, but I'll put this on Blackboard too. Oops. Sorry about that. What did I do? What did I do? Sorry about that. As you can tell, I'm not tech savvy. All right, back to the outcomes. 148 people were released from the APAC compared to 247 from other prisons in Brazil. And these prisons were not even the worst of the worst. The outcomes were reviewed 3 years after release, the inmates, and they were found to have recidivated less. Even the families of those who offended reporting feeling very positive over the treatment and the experience. Now, as you're going to see, I'm going to talk about, I think this is chapter 18, but so the ones that are doing it, you can use this information, but I want you to expand on it more so. I'm just going to highlight, okay? Because I don't want you to give details over what's in the chapter. I want you to do a summary and again explain your opinion of it. Loren Walker, who's one of the authors, she developed a program for inmates to teach them the skills of restorative justice. It trains inmates for 12 weeks so they better communicate, coping with difficult issues, and focus more on reinforcement than on negative. We use emotional intelligence skills required to better understand, empathize, and negotiate with other people. This is the emotional intelligence skills is what this program is based on. This helps your level of ability to understand other people, what motivates them, and how to work cooperatively with them. Howard Gardner, who is an influential Harvard theorist, he said that using the emotional intelligence skills will help people understand others, and that is what motivates them. Each meeting or training is opened with something they are grateful for. Each session is ended with compliments. These programs use what is called the solution-focused approach, uses language skills to assist people in problem solving by getting them to envision how they will behave, find their strengths. You point out their strengths. This approach looks at the solution and goals. It finds out what the inmates care about, what's important to them, and focuses on them. It focuses on the good things and not the bad, their strengths and not their weaknesses. As we said, somebody that does something bad doesn't make them a bad person. It's just what they did was bad. So think about it. How would you feel if someone's always focusing on your weaknesses? And I know this happens because as a teacher, many times when we're reading assignments, we're looking for the good and the bad, but we also are pointing out what you need to improve on, but not to make you feel bad, but to increase and help you to be a better writer, a better researcher. But it is sometimes we forget to put in there, what's good about it. Of course, I'm not guilty of that. No, never. This program genuinely holds people accountable. Involves some of the restorative questions. Who was affected by the wrongdoing? How were they affected? And what might be done to repair the harm? It puts the focus back on the victims, those that were harmed. Profoundly human approach to corrections. If you are really accountable, you need to know how your behavior affected others. Rights the wrongs. Understand who was harmed and the harm caused. It focuses on repairing the harm, but first, they have to know what that harm is to know how to repair it. Restorative justice is about the victim and the victim's harm. So the first step before anyone can begin to heal, they must first have empathy for their victims and for the people harmed and have a full understanding of exactly what their actions caused. So we talked about forgiveness, and in some areas that it's not always required. It doesn't always happen, but in these programs, it's introduced as a life skill. In other words, forgiveness is freeing. It's freeing the resentment that they feel. If you're a victim and you can't forget, you'll build resentment, anger, and you may push this out on others. It's going to affect your life. It can affect your health. We've got a very powerful video that I'm going to show you in class. Another reentry program for offenders or inmates uses the public health approach in restorative circles. And the Huikahi restorative circle process used the skills that were taught in the program by Loren Walker. It is a process for reentry. It includes the individuals, their families and friends, and even a prison rep. This was originally called restorative circles. Uh, this includes the group plus the individual. It is solution-focused language, um, discovering their strengths, establishing their goals and ways to achieve them, like we talked about earlier in that other program, that it's focusing on the strengths, and it's based, as I said, on the public health approach. This is to help people as established by the World Health Organization. This program meets the 5 principles of effective reentry. They prepare them for reentry. It builds the bridges between prisons and communities, sees the moment of release. In other words, make a celebration of the time that they are released. It strengthens the concentric circles of support and promotes successful reintegration from the prison life to community life. The outcomes of the Huikahi process are the expected results: crime prevention and decreased recidivism, provides healing for both the families, the victims, and the offender. And why are the families involved? Uh, think about it. When an offender is gone, you lose your income. They may have been involved in drug use. It helps the families accept that and adjust and speak out. It helps with the stress of a prisoner returning to the family. It helps with depression, as well as the shame of being incarcerated. The results that have been shown for these circle processes, there were 52 circles in 2005 through 2010. Of the 50 incarcerated people, 208 total participated. 100% of all of those that participated had a positive or a very positive experience. The recidivism rates dropped. 23 were out of prison for 2 years without recidivating. 15 remained with no new charges. 70% have had no contact with the criminal justice system. So that's a 30% recidivism rate, meaning that 30% recidivated. And the typical recidivism rate in Hawaii is 54.7%. So you can see that it dropped by 24.7%. I don't want you to focus just on the statistics of any program. It's also important to look at the satisfaction and the results on the healing of the victims and the offenders and the families. And only 5 of the 169 participants felt mixed about the process. They just, I'm not sure. Optimism that the incarcerated person would stay out of prison was highly rated. Even after they recidivism, the family thought the process was healing and very beneficial. 52 to 63% of those incarcerated are the parents of minor children. So when they include these circle processes, that is an important element. This reentry program is really one of my favorite programs. I think it's just is so positive, and it's a celebration for parolees and probationers on the completion of their sentence or their community sentence. And the celebration is when an individual completes successfully their time or their probation. They conducted a celebration circle, and the participants were judges, parole board members, lawyers, prison staff, parolees, anybody that was involved with their rejuvenation, that was involved with their incarceration. It includes music and refreshments, a circle, the awards, and sharing. And think how productive it is for everyone involved, where the inmate's actually meeting with the judge that incarcerated them. It may give the judge more incentive to place them in that area. It also will help the inmate to show what they've done with themselves to the judge and to the members of the court. And the probation celebration circle involves probation officers, family, and probationer. Now, remember, this is probation, which is different than earlier I was mentioned. Those were parole leaving prison. We're talking about now when they have completed their probation. Everyone lists the inmate's strengths. A plan is made for reparation to the victim. The family might have requests to the probation officers, to the probationary or person in front of the officers to let them know what they would like to happen when they're now that they're off probation. And the circle always ends with compliments again. And again, I know you're asking yourself, what is the importance of the ritual? Um, the moral inclusion of the circle helps the reintegration of the offender. It creates connections between the community and the offender, the family, the parolee. And rituals should always be emotionally satisfying. They don't have to be formal. Everyone must feel connected to what's going on in some way. The participant satisfaction results, 75% said that these rituals were very positive. They felt recognition for their input and acknowledgement for their achievements. Now, this next part that I'm going to go over is about intensive supervision, and you have to read the articles that are on Blackboard, and there's one there about intensive supervision. I have mixed feelings over intensive supervision, but you'll see why in a little while when we finish this. This type of supervision is designed for offenders who need more than normal probation, but they don't need to be incarcerated. It increases client contact over normal probation. Over 40 states have a total of over 100,000 clients currently in intensive supervision. The the probation officer has small caseloads, 50 to 40, where many on regular probation have hundreds on their caseloads. They are closely watched by the probation officers, and they are admitted and accepted for intensive supervision instead of incarceration based on their offense. So some exclude violent offenders. There are many drug abusers involved in intensive supervision. There's three main goals to the intensive supervision: to lower incarceration rates. Instead of incarcerating and increasing those rates, we're going to provide an alternative. The main goal is to control the high-risk offenders that are allowed into the program, as well as increase reintegration. It can maintain their community ties, so it strengthens their reintegration and provides a more productive life than being removed from their home and causing the stress. There are also more uses of the intensive probation supervision. It's a direct sentence from the judge. It provides post-sentencing alternative in order to divert offenders from the correctional system and being incarcerated. It involves a case management. It gives local probation staff some flexibility in dealing with the clients. And the probation violators, it brings them halfway back into the community. They're living at home, but they're under strict rules. And some areas of, depending on where the probationer is, uses all of the above. So what does intensive probation look like? It can be different according to the jurisdiction in the state, but generally each probationer meets with an officer 4 times a week. That could be in the office, that could be in the home, that could be at work. They'll make weekly contact, the officers, with the offender, with parents, with the school, with employers, with their treatment program, wherever they are ordered to attend or are attending. And many times you'll see intensive probation for juveniles. The officer will monitor all activities, their restitution, whatever that is ordered or suggested. It also monitors their fees that they would pay the offender, as well as court fees. I mean, not the offender, I'm sorry, that would pay the parole officer, as well as any court fees. So uh, there's different ways to use the intensive probation. You may have one officer supervising 15 youth. You might have two officers working together that will supervise 25, and even three people working together to supervise more than that, up to 40. And as always, we look at the cost. And when we look at the cost, it's not just monetary costs, but it could be what are the costs of staying in the community as opposed to being incarcerated. In 2008, it cost $9.7 million for juvenile on intensive probation, $3,147 per youth. There were 61% that were successful. Half of those were actually transferred down to regular probation. 24% were committed back to the state, and 50% had violations of probation. I want you to think of this, and we'll talk about this in class. Why do you think there was such a high level of violations? We're going to answer that in class. And of course, these results lead to questions and concerns, especially from professionals. Is it too much? Does it cause net widening? Does it lead to a greater number of commitments down the road? Does it depend on the officer, on the person that involved with the offender? And when we have these questions, then we look at the effectiveness of these intensive probation services programs. The failure is high, and again in class, I want you to answer, why do you believe it is high? They have a higher rearrest rate. In some cases, it's as high as 50%, as we just explained. Also, too, remember, even though it appears high, this is expected. More serious offenders are included. The probation officer may invoke violations more quickly. It does work better with some people. Some individuals adhere to the requirements better. They like being watched and have those restrictions. High employment is a plus to help them succeed. In other words, if the probationer is employed in idle hands, they are more likely to succeed. Most likely to fail would be the young offenders with the petty offenses. We'll talk about that. It's more successful with other treatment modalities. In other words, are they attending the problem-solving courts? Are they attending treatment? Are they receiving assistance from other services and community services? I'm going to end it here, and look, it's only 33 minutes. I do want to remind you to make sure you have read over the intensive supervision article. Make sure you've read the domestic violence article, because we're going to talk about that at the beginning of class. And also make sure you have read all of this information, because we're going to do an activity, a couple of them in class, where we're actually going to watch a video. So you have to have read all this information to be able to complete that work. I'll see everybody next week.